Tonight, I won't take too much more time because Dan, I know, needs the time, but I was pestering Dan to give a talk because he can talk about a lot of different things. I had no idea what he was going to come up with, and he came up with something truly unique for the society, I think. So at least I haven't really seen anything like this for a while. So Dan has got a background, and many of you know him in economic geology and mineral resources, worked for several mining companies, has done a lot of different things, taught at Sells Community College in Sells for 4 years, and is just a really interesting fellow. So, and I think he needs all the time I can give him, so I'm going to ask you to come up and get started, Dan.
Thanks, Phil.
You got the pointer as well?
Yeah, I got the pointer. Good evening. Thanks for showing up. Great to see everybody. And thanks to Ann for what a splendid president she's been, particularly after following Mike's great run. And I know everybody in the society is grateful for her contributions. So I thought stromatolites would make sense tonight. And the cover here, everybody knows War of the Worlds, how bugs saved us in the end because they neutralized the aliens from space. But what we're finding is that the aliens from space are us. And this image on your left is from the Stroley Pool in Western Australia. And the view over there is from North America. It's the Novakitic. I'll work on the pronunciation, but it's pretty close. Greenstone Belt in Quebec, which variously people think is the oldest bedrock on the planet, but there's a lot of competitors for that title. Let's see. Where's a good place? Jordan, where's a good place to point this? There we go. Was that you or me? Okay. Okay, unpacking Earth and the early solar system. Thought exercise, the null extinction. An extinction that never was. An extinction is the complete disappearance of a species from Earth. A main feature of widespread extinction is the creation of an abundance of niches. What do you call a planetary region with numerous niches but no previous biological presence? What do you call the absence of life forms that never existed in the first place, particularly on Earth? I suggest a null extinction leading to a completely new existence. The assemblage of meteoritic knowledge enabling a beginning on Earth and Mars, for example. And that point about knowledge means that things that guide our planet are not necessarily physical entities, but they are communication devices between entities. Were there predecessor molecules in space with biochemical wisdom or templates, quorum sensing, and self-organization for growing life? This concept of quorum sensing, I'm going to make mention of it tonight because when we look up and we see birds banking at the same time, or we see fish banking at the same time, that's quorum sensing, where the internal group knows what to do without external influence. I want to take a moment to thank Doug Shakel. In 1980, I took a field trip led by Doug Shakel, and many of you remember him from Pima College and the AGS, up to the Sierra Ancha Mountains just north of Roosevelt Lake. We went on Aztec Peak to the exposures of the Mescal Formation, part of the Apache group. After the encounter, I began to accumulate stromatolites from vendors at the TGMS, particularly Glenn Archer of Perth, Australia. This is Glenn over here. Many of you know him. He sets up on Oracle and over near Kino. Great man. He runs his dozer in Western Australia, and he introduced many of us to stromatolites. Excuse me. Around 2010, I attended a multi-day field trip to Mount Isa Inlet in Queensland, Australia, led by a Scottish-Australian guy. Geologist was fond of saying in the lexicon of World War I, I'm not going to die in the ditch over that one, regarding controversial geological theory. Well, tonight I may die in a ditch, but I will pop back up, I assure you. It was there amidst the spinifex and aboriginal communities that I saw the widespread pervasive occurrence of ancient stromatolites covering acres and acres of virgin Australian desert, ancient leftover beaches. And this is perhaps the most compelling thing that I can offer you is when you go outdoors and you see the conifers, and you see the rhododendrons, and you see the saguaros, think about the huge beaches and the many, many, many species or variants of stromatolites, microbial entities that inhabited the planet for 3 billion years and are still around. A few questions. Stromatolites and microbiolites, what are they? Organo-sedimentary deposits, rocky reef-like structures formed by trapping, binding, and cementation of sedimentary grains. What is putative? For a long time, because the scientific tools in the community were not available to definitively define the ages of ancient stromatolites, or even if they were derived from life or by biogenic processes. So the word putative, or as you might say, the reputed rock, we had a lot of controversy, and that actually persists to this day. Who accepts Strelly Pool, who rejects Strelly Pool, who accepts apex chert, who rejects apex chert. So that is, we've moved towards more resolution in the academic community because the tools are much better, and we're finding that everything's narrowing down to rocks that are 4.1 billion to 4.3 billion, and life forms that parallel that, which begs the question, was there always life on the planet that flew in with meteorites? And what are purple bacteria? The key here, anoxygenic, purple photosynthetic protobacteria that are phototropic, but they use sulfide, hydrogen, and organic compounds as an electron donor. So they're not exactly green trees outside. They use other means of pigmentation. Chloroplast, many of you know what that is. Chimeric definition, I love this word because chimeric, in addition to wearing a pointy hat on your head, is having parts of different origins relating to or denoting an organism containing a mixture of genetically different tissue. So for example, we've got mitochondrial DNA. Well, that's not human, but of course it is human, but it was obtained by chimeric action. Trees, vegetation with chloroplasts, that's another chimeric activity where we're borrowing in organelles into an organism. Sponge microbial consortium. So we strive to get simplistic definitions, and we have bacteria, and then we have metazoans, which are humans and plants and crusts of different kinds. A consortium is where you have multiple things co-inhabiting, lending strength to each other. What might be learned from this presentation? The study of stromatolites is often driven by personalities and competing philosophies, including the conservatism of science. Stromatolites aren't just another rock. They have a huge diversity, style, extent, function, and host. They invite contemplation of those long, lonely beaches I was referring to. And then, of course, we get so much of our copper from South Africa, stromatolitic copper. We get much of our oil from stromatolitic formations like the Chewer Group in Grand Canyon. And we get so much of our iron from the banded iron formations that are supported by photosynthetic action. Maybe life didn't take on eons to evolve, but was there more or less right at the beginning, hidden now from our modern view by the ancient actions of erosion and metamorphism upon the earliest outcrops. And about AI, I use it when I think it will safely add to the content, but this isn't, generally speaking, an AI presentation. Stromatolites, the vocabulary of skepticism, doubt, disbelief, turf, arrogance, misidentification. The Nuvagitic faux amphibolite, I ordered a piece of that 15 years ago from a guy, a student, French-speaking student from Quebec. But at the time, there was not enough scientific horsepower for accurate early age analyses to prove for sure the deep history of these occurrences up in Canada. Isua, Greenland, back and forth debates on dates and morphology got kind of acrimonious there in the literature between, for example, Nutman and Allwood. Apex chert, yes, no, yes, no, yes. William Schaaf at UCLA was vindicated. So you've got to look at these scientists, and they finally prevail after years and years of trying to prove their focused scientific interests. Dubio fossils, pseudofossils, loss of the geologic record, as I mentioned, development of new tools such as 3D, chemical, and microscopy to get better information. Mars, inorganic versus organic processes. And disaster species. Do stromatolites, now that they're less popular because there are grazers like snails that will eat them, so do they come back after extinctions where the grazers have died? So for example, the Moenkopi version that's over in Nevada, was that a disaster species after the Permo-Triassic extinction? Probably was. Genetics, an AI quote. The human genome is fundamentally different from a stromatolite genome, not similar. Stromatolites are not a single organism with a single genome, but a rather complex layered rock-like structure built by communities of microorganisms, primarily cyanobacteria, which are prokaryotes. Humans are multicellular eukaryotes. I have a section in here, it's going to take a bit of time, not too much, but I want to explain. And you know, I'm a geologist, I'm not a geneticist, and so I'm talking out of my strength, but I want to make sure that we understand that this talk is going to start with the smallest bugs in deep places on the planet, under the ocean, and it's going to progress up to the surface via volcanoes and spreading centers, and it's going to go up the continental slope. It's going to enter into shallows around continents, and eventually it's going to form large beaches. So we're tracing the evolution of life in the early days and even to now. Cosmological section. The fractions of existence. Well, we get intimidated, in my opinion. I know I do. People say billions and billions of years the universe was created. I think that's an overstatement. It is billions of years, but it intimidates us to thinking that we really don't have a piece of that for ourselves. And I have some proportions here that I'll mention to you in a second. So this particular view from Astrography, it's a Polish outfit, I think. They do fantastic artwork. This is a view 4.6 billion years ago. Very small part of the sky that I enlarged from their documents. Red numbers are the age ratio of selected objects to the universe. Age of the universe is a 1-to-1, of course. Age of the solar system is a 1-to-3. Age of oldest identified zircons in the Jack Hills of Australia, 4.4. So that's about a third of the age of the universe. And so it goes. Age of old stromatolites like the Dresser, a 1/4. So these are not big numbers. These are not orders of magnitude different. They are essentially within the same scope, the same number of years. So we're participating in the universe, and the things that created us and the DNA that we have and so on evolved or developed from years ago and was a significant fraction of the universe. All right. I want to mention that the last bombardment of the meteors took place about 4.1 to 3.9 billion years ago, and we had meteorites coming in of all kinds. So the Allende was a carbonaceous chondrite, and the microscopic diamonds in there are as old as 12 billion years. So there's a sizable fraction of the history of the solar system and the universe. And then this one down here, the Erkchek, is from Africa, Northwest Africa, and it recrystallized. So we have the one that's essentially hasn't changed in billions of years, and we have the other one that melted and remelted, and it developed kind of a, they call it an andesite, but it looks like it's more of a kind of a fine granitoid. And it's got diopside in it and other things. And when you look at it, you'd think it was basically an igneous rock. So we've got all this different material from different sources. Overview of key bedrocks with associated biomarkers. This means graphite, graphite of an appropriate isotopic signature. The Jack Hills, we're talking about zircons at 4.4, but people have identified 4.1 graphite in the Jack Hills down in West Australia. The Nuviatic, the greenstone belt, less than 4.3 in the jasperite from there. Western Australia, zircons around 4.1, 4.4, and then Achillea in southwest Greenland 3.85, and Ishiwa 3.7. So we have a kind of a consensus there of 4.0 plus or minus 0.2. So we've gone from not knowing really what the heck was going on 10 years ago to a state where we have basically throughout the planet we have a consensus as to how old the oldest life could be. And bear in mind that those rocks of those ages, that's what's left. Whatever could have been older is eroded and disappeared. Early life likely survived meteor bombardments. I'll just make the point that there were subsurface sanctuaries deep underground. So when you're being bombarded by meteorites, the microbes go underground. And I've got some examples of contemporary microbiolites that have been underground. UCLA has piloted a lot of this research. Mark Harrison, UCLA. Summary, geochemists have found probable evidence for life at least 4.1 billion years ago. And this is older than. And what they did was they sampled hundreds of zircons and they looked for examples of graphite sealed up in the zircons. Elizabeth Bell was one of the researchers, 10,000 zircons from Western Australia, that's what they gathered. And then they asked the question of Harrison, how confident are they that their zircon presents 4.1 billion year old graphite? Very confident, he says. There's no better case of a primary inclusion. And the whole point of having that is if you're trying to establish the age. The UCLA research suggests life in the universe could be abundant, Harrison said. On Earth, simple life seems to have formed quickly. And so here we have the 4.1 billion year old zircon containing graphite as shown by the arrows. And then Bell, who was in his lab, said we need to think differently about the early Earth. Getting from deep underground to the shoreline. I have a series of slides here that go from deep underground to the shoreline progressively. Each slide demonstrates a step in that process. Chemoautolithotrophs. Chemo means chemical, auto, self-actuating, litho, rock, or non-biogenic, and troph, feeding or nourishment. So chemoautolithotroph is something, is a bug that exists perhaps thousands or even kilometers of feet below the ocean surface typically, and it eats pyroxenes or feldspars slowly. There's a little moisture there. It can take a bite every couple of thousand years. So everything's not existing at our 24-hour level. Massive sulfide deposits are commonly found along ocean ridges, as we know. And then you go from that over in this corner. I had a shot at buying a piece of core from a basement smoker. This drill core came from the Flambeau copper gold strip mine metasediment in the Red Lake Greenstone area up in Wisconsin. I wasn't able to get it, but these hydrothermal vents are home to chemosynthetic bacteria and archaea that form at the base of a food chain. Now, let me make a point. You might say, well, we've got photosynthesis, we've got chlorophyll. Why do we need, and how can we exist below that? The driver is the chemo. Up on the surface, it's the photo, it's light from the sun, but down there, the energy is generated by chemical reaction. Okay, this is details of a submarine volcano. I want to highlight the SSMB, that's the subsea floor microbial biosphere. And then it's highlighted there in a dashed line, and it's beneath the submarine volcano or the black smoker. And you can see the distribution of chemicals in this environment. So that's where we're going to start. Now, This photo here is one of several images from South Africa, the Mponeng gold mine with bacteria and other organisms like worms and flatworms at depths of 3 to 4 kilometers. And they use the energy from natural radioactivity. So they've got the bugs down there very, very deep. And then here's an image of the chemoautotroph. The relationship between the deep biosphere and stromatolites centers on their shared microbial ancestry and contributions to the Earth's early ecosystems. I just toss this in there because it's of interest to those of us that are in mining and metals. Characteristics of each system, the deep biosphere versus the stromatolitic. I'm not going to read all of this, but deep biosphere extends miles below the surface. Chemosynthetic, meaning life is sustained by chemical energy. A diverse range of bacteria and archaea, including extremophiles. And then life exists in pores and fractures within solid rock, forming a vast interconnected network. Whereas stromatolites are formed in shallow sunlit water. The surface layer is dominated by photosynthetic organisms like cyanobacteria, and they're formed by microbial mats that could be flattish or grow domes and other things. And then they're built as layers, dome-shaped or conical sedimentary structures. Supplemental information, just quickly, chemoautotroph is a chemical self-feeder. We can't feed ourselves, we have to eat lettuce and cows. Chemoautotrophs are organisms that produce their own food instead of using light, and not surprisingly, many chemoautotrophs are symbionts, trading their chemistry skills for sheltered habitats. That's a consortium notion. Okay, ancient microbial strategies. Deep water discoveries. The discovery of ancient stromatolites formed in deep, dark oceans was challenged by the assumption that all stromatolites were from shallow, sunlit environments. So what that means is that there were people that basically were one kind of religion. And so if you didn't have chloroplasts, you weren't a fan of stromatolites. And so what has been revealed is that a kind of a broad definition, microbiolite and stromatolite and words of that nature define this larger universe besides just a narrow interpretation of stromatolites. Okay, scientists find life in Antarctica's blood red falls, subglacial lakes and ice cores dating back thousands to millions of years. These are contemporary features. This guy standing there in the blood red falls, extreme cold, darkness, and high salt content. And then an ecosystem trapped under a glacier in Antarctica for nearly 2 million years. Remember that Antarctica got its ice about 30 million years ago, unlike the Arctic, which probably got it during the Pliocene. So this has been a history, a long, long history of ice, and these critters are able to exist. So this is a good example when you say, well, what happens when meteorites hit? Well, the bugs survive at depth, and they form these kinds of features. Blood falls. I'm going to skip over that. So, all right, we have established that they're in the upper crust, but in the dark. So this is an interesting slide. This article was interesting. Modern living intertidal stromatolites on the Shaibara Island. So this is Saudi Arabia. The arrow points to a particular beach in Saudi Arabia. The middle point is an enlargement, and then the one on the right shows the beach area. These are photos taken by drones, and basically this is the, you can see the beach ridge in A, and then everything below it are stromatolitic communities. So what has happened is the microbiolite bacteria has come up in vents in one form or another, crawled up the slope or migrated different species of microbials and established three communities in this case. Type 1 is the rhomboids, type 2 is the ovoids, and type 3 is the low relief sheets. Three different communities that exist today on the beaches. Now, how did they get to that point? This, by the way, is examples of microscopic and X-ray details, different kinds of laminates and things that show what's going on in detail. This is a further level of detail. I'm going to mention a few times EPS, extracellular polymeric substance and cyanobacteria details. The EPS is the polymer, and polymer is ubiquitous in the growth of stromatolites. So they show about 12 here. They were able to number, there's at least 12, I think, different members in the communities along the supertidal, the tidal, and the subtidal, and then down in the deeper water. Now, what did they find out when they went down there and studied the floor? They found structural evolution of the planet is a catalog of environments that prove to be viable for microbial occurrence. The investigated dome-shaped limestone at 734 meters water depth. This was taken by a diving robot and looking down on this thing growing. Here's an example, same environment. You can see an irregular fracture there, and then you can see material bubbling out of the fracture and forming an initial stromatolite on the floor. All right, so the microbial mats bulge at the gas outlets along the seafloor fracture. They are involved in the construction of the dome-like stromatolite. Marum is an outfit in Germany with University of Bremen, I think. Unlike the microsynthetic microbes that live in the shallow sea, which extract energy for the metabolism from the sun's rays, these microbes use energy generated in the extraction of methane coming up fractures like this. Bacteria living on the seabed transform the hydrogen sulfide that is produced during methane decomposition. Since the bacteria in the Arabian Sea have hardly any free oxygen at this depth, they probably use nitrate instead of oxygen, which promotes calcification. So what they're doing is they're improvising. They're down there and they improvise chemicals and they create organ donors that allow them to sustain their lives. And then geologically, they come up through fractures and then the fractures grow. So you get a combination of geological phenomena and biological phenomena. A little bit about genetics and oxygen now that we've gone from the deep lithosphere to the daylight organisms that we saw in the case of Saudi Arabia. The last universal common ancestor is Luca. Luca is a hypothesized common ancestral cell population from which all subsequent life forms descend, including bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And although the timing of Luca cannot be definitively constrained, most studies suggest that Luca exists 3.5 billion years ago and possibly as early as 4.3. While no fossil evidence of Luca exists because it's so ancient and it's probably been destroyed and consumed, the detailed biochemical similarity of all current life divided into the three domains makes its existence widely accepted by biochemists. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of the distribution of life forms where Luca fits into all of that. Prokaryote and eukaryote definitions. Some of you may remember this, but the essence is a prokaryote, and that's all of the early stromatolites, a microscopic single-celled organism that has neither a distinct nucleus with a membrane nor any other specialized organelle. So you would think that they're really primitive. They are primitive, but they're highly functional, and they include the bacteria and cyanobacteria. The key word there is keri, which means nut or kernel, nucleus, and then the eukaryotes are everything else pretty much in terms of large-scale creatures like ourselves and plants and birds and so on. And then it's always a question about the oldest eukaryotes because they lead to us. So 1.64 billion years ago is a date, but then they also throw around other evidence. Some evidence suggests that eukaryote cells may have evolved as early as 2.7. All right, Jill Banfield is one of 3 people that authored a interesting, fascinating report that I could barely read the abstract, much less dive into it. But she says, an expanded genetic code is one in which the DNA is read in a different way than expected. So she's being creative there. She's being insightful. It's a new genetic code. Only if we understand the code can we understand these organisms and what they do. So our knowledge, our ability to even think about these things is limited at this point. And people like Jill Banfield are inventing the new ways to think about things. So November 21st down here, 2025, which is like 2 weeks ago, a new Tree of Life came out. And they did one about 5 years ago, and this, I think, is the newest one. Luca is at the center of it, and then you notice up at the upper middle, the cyanobacteria, that's on one distant arm. So you have cyanobacteria, and then all these other varieties of things. And so you see how just one little part fits in and creates a whole number of options for the rest of us. While there exists a wide variety of photosynthetic organisms from cyanobacteria to algae and higher plants, the cellular machinery responsible for water splitting is unique and uses the same mechanism across all species. And the increase in concentration of O2 in the atmosphere started about 2.5 billion years ago and then went through the Great Oxidation Event. And that was a catastrophe. Why was it a catastrophe? Because if you're used to breathing CO2 and exhaling oxygen, and then suddenly all you have is oxygen, it destroys you. We like the oxygen, but the early stromatolites didn't like the oxygen. All right, this is a quick view of the buildup of oxygen. You can see you're down around 0 at 2.3, and then it builds up to about 21%, which is what we're breathing now. I'm not going to go all over this, but except to say there are a number of varieties of chlorophyll, and different kinds of chlorophyll support different kinds of algae and human beings, and different colors of algae that perform different things. Unpacking the Hadean, 4.6 to 4.4, and the pre-Archean, 4 to 4.5. That's 3.5. This is the time frame when Earth was created and the inorganic and organic started to merge together. To unpack means to analyze something into its component elements. So we're going to, by looking at these slides, we're going to unpack the Yellowgarn craton in Western Australia and the Narrier terrain. We're going to unpack the northern Canada, Laurentia area. We're going to unpack Greenland, Laurentia, and we're going to unpack the Pilbara craton of Western Australia. And I'm not going to, don't freak out, I'm not going to cover all this, but Stanoramic has been around. I started studying this stuff about 40 years ago, but modestly, I'm not like a big scholar on it, but certain names showed up, and his kept showing up. So what's fascinating, what he wrote in a paper that was a few years ago, this is key. The microorganisms communicate with each other and move into positions that allow them to interact most efficiently with their neighbors. Metabolic activity is coordinated to ensure the most effective harvesting of nutrients, or in the case of photoautotrophic microbes, light. Metabolic products or toxins are actively removed from the biofilm, also known as stromatolite, using channels along which the unwanted matter is flushed out with circulating water currents. Decisions are made by quorum sensing involving all members of the biofilm. So when you look at a stromatolite and you think, well, there's a lumpy thing, this thing is thinking. As he said, it's more than an ecosystem even. It is a organism. It's an organism. When you see stromatolites, they are thinking, they are feeling, they are flexing together. They are the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea that are responding to their environment. And that's a picture of Stanoramic. All right, this was from an earlier paper by him and his cohort, Dr. Nafka, I think. And so this is from 1999. So what has happened here is, number one, the identified species have gone over to here. The total number of species or forms has increased from 1187 to probably 2,000 or more. And based on 1990, the cautious people put the age at 2.5. Now we know it's extending, as I mentioned, it's extending out here. So this whole curve in a matter of what, 20 to 30 years has enlarged tremendously, because people now know what they're looking at, and they know how to analyze it. I'll only say that this is the difference between microbially induced sedimentary structures that are essentially flat, the top one, and stromatolitic textures that keep building. So you have ones that don't build too much and ones that do build a lot. Ancient rocks and zircons of North America: the Jack Hills, the Noavagitic, the Castanice, Greenland, and Ishwa and Keelia, and that's QU with a K, and Pilbara stromatolites: Dresser, Apex, Chert, and Strelly Pool. All right, this is the Jack Hills, the narrier terrain. Looks kind of like Arizona. You can see it over there, the Jack Hills and the narrier terrain in the circle. And typically cool word, Australian, English, Arawando, obviously a native name. A resistant outcrop of Archean sandstone. And so this is the area where they found rock that looks like this. This is the metaconglomerate. And where did they get the zircons? That rock is eroded away. So they know the zircons are 4.3, 4.4, but they no longer have the rock from which they came. Here's 3 photos I got from vendors. I have some of this myself, as a matter of fact. The narrier, nice terrain, and you can see that you tuck your zircons in here. These metaconglomerates aren't very metamorphosed. You see the fractures are going around the stones in there rather than through them. So it's not too tight. Jack Hills zircons, I'll only say that contain features that are potential evidence of early life, specifically a 4.1 billion year old zircon grain containing graphite with a high concentration of carbon-12. This isotopic signature is characteristic of biogenic carbon. And the other point was the graphite was found encased in a zircon crystal that formed under conditions of lower temperatures and pressure than previously thought for an early Earth condition. All right, this is Noavagitic. I bought this guy up here in about 2010, and it's a faux amphibolite, and it's part of the greenstone belt over next to the Hudson Bay. And then I got another piece that's similar to it, but it's an amphibolite. It's the one on the right. It's got garnets in it. And so the question always is, are these the oldest rocks on Earth? Well, I think we've seen that that's very hard to say they're the oldest. They're amongst the oldest. And then here's a polar bear. You know, when you go up in the north, the light is low, and so you tend to have darkness even in the middle of the day. All right, this is a close-up of what's called Porpoise Cove, and it's right on, you can see it up here. It's on the east shore of Hudson Bay, and it is part of the mafic metavolcanic rocks that are of interest, and this is a photo of them, heavily glaciated area. This is some close-ups of the rock, interesting textures. And variation in the isotope tracer, neodymium 142, I guess, is measured in the dominant volcanic rock, supports an age of 4.3 billion years old. This is the jasperite, and this is the one, it's like a banded iron, I guess, and it's got, as you can see in the photos up there, those are textures that are generated by bacteria. A castanice. Is there life in a castanice? Well, a castanice is up in the Northwest Territories area. It's part of the old slave craton. The Aquileia Island and Ishua are over there on the southwest side of Greenland, and then the Nuvatutic is over on the east side of Hudson's Bay. And so the one of the vendors that I've gotten familiar with a little bit, his name is Tom Capitani, and he took a 2017 field trip to Canada, and he wrote a narrative, and I'll only say that he visited this stuff and harvested rock. It's a 4.03 billion year old crustal rock only, found in a small area just south of the Arctic Circle. And that might be him there, and you see an outcrop, and here's the water here, and he says he always had a guy with a gun, but they never ran into polar bears. This is what a cast of ice looks like. I say thanks to Jim Wright, who did a lot of work in Pima County for quite a while with Gordon Haxel and Floyd. You knew Jim Wright. And so the impacts, meteorite impacts, provided the intense heat necessary for melting at shallow crust, but no biogenic stuff. And then Greenland locales, Ishua and Aquila, and they're labeled over there. Nuuk apparently is the capital of Greenland, and so you can see the ice-free areas and the ice. Now this is Ishua, Archean greenstone. It's located on the southwest Greenland area, and it's aged between 3.7 and 3.8. Belt contains variably metamorphosed mafic volcanics and sedimentary rocks. And the key on some of this was, with global warming, or whatever you want to call it, areas that had not been exposed for years became present and could be sampled. And this is what that rock looks like. Now, something that was very controversial, the ice melted, and so a guy named Nutman and his party, Alan Nutman, went up and they found this, and so one person from NASA said, this isn't stromatolites, and Nutman said, yes it is. So they went back and forth for a number of years, and then finally the gal from NASA said, well, it could be stromatolites. And so that's a very early photograph, and just recently exposed. This is Nutman and his partner, Vicki Bennett, and kudos to him. Kudos to him that he hung in there, he took all the flack, he got criticized, he went through academic hell and stayed with his interpretation. Because what they're finding is that those that see some form of life, even if it's not conclusive, they tend to be right because the tools improve for analyzing it, and their instincts and their gut ends up being close to correct, but over time. The case for a biological origin of Greenland structures is limited by the information available to the tiny outcrop. Abigail Allwood is the kind of the cautious one. There are very few structures available to study. She makes a good point. They're building the whole case on practically nothing in a very remote location. And then she acquiesces and says, give life an opportunity and it'll run with it. And that's kind of become my interpretation after looking at all that. Yes, it'll run with it, and it'll run with it with great depth and with great historical relevance. So this is the Aquileia supercrustal belt, and the importance of this is this specimen is from Aquileia Island, and it's over 3.85 billion years old, and it's got it's hard to read from this angle, but graphite inclusions that carry the same carbon isotope seen in living systems. Okay, earliest are Australian archaeostromatolites. Why Australia? Answer, ancient surviving coastline host rocks of the Pilbara Craton. So Western Australia has a lot of old stuff. And I put these up here because I've been interested in these three, how do they work? And Dresser, Apex Chert, and Strelly Pool. So each one comes from a different environment. And microorganisms have long been implicated in the construction of stromatolites. And I'm going to DNA. Oh, the reason why I included this, hats off to Jan. Jan was saying, Well, how do you know the age of this stuff? And I don't, but I look at what they're doing, and Jan essentially, without saying this, indicated this notion of builders, tenants, and squatters. The builders build it, the tenant biology, bacteria moves in, and then the squatters much later come in. So you have three different sources of microorganisms in there. And how do you sort them out so you get an accurate age? Early Precambrian dresser formation. All right, so as it turns out, this is I'll point, well, the SP, AB, and DF. SP is Strelly Pool, AB is the apex basalt and the apex chert, and then the DF is the dresser formation. And within those are three unique and different styles of stromatolites. SP is more of a quiet marine or shoreline with even and rigorously duplicated even beds. AB is cherty, and DF was apparently formed in a caldera. There are volcanic influences. There are elements that come from a volcanic background. And so when you look at them, you see distinct differences. I'm going to trip past this one, and I'm going to trip past this one except to say that the Strelly pooled depositional environment, shallow marine platform carbonates, and peritidal environments versus shallow water, active volcanic caldera with active hydrothermal vents. So basically one is from a volcanic terrain and one is from a sedimentary shoreline. Here's a close-up of dresser, and over there are various styles of mapping, microscopic mapping, and you can see the hematite and the barite. Those are derived from the caldera environment. This is dresser. Now, dresser just looks a little nuts. Each one has different amounts of silica and mafic components. And one of the things that amazes me is the variety. We say stromatolites, we think, well, that's one thing. But actually, it's thousands of things. And each thing has its own style, its own members, its own source materials. So this is derived from a volcanic environment. Apex chert, again, you can see the AB, apex basalt. This is what it looks like. This is the stuff that this gentleman shot from UCLA. He's another one that staked his career 30, 40 years ago on the age of the apex chert, and a lot of people said, you're out of your mind. But a long controversy. Now a comprehensive analysis of these microfossils suggests that these formations do indeed represent ancient microbes. So he won the day. This is forms that apex chert might have had. That's a close analysis. Then Strelly Pool is the one up there, and we've gone over this to a degree. This characterizes it. And then this is what the land looks like over there in Western Australia. And you can see it looks a little bit like Arizona, but it's much more rufous, generally reddish, like a laterite. This is Strelly Pool. Well organized. It looks even like there are units that are repeating themselves, undulating, but not wild or crazy or with irregular mafic or quartz horizons. It's worth mentioning, though, that some of these textures, for example, these A textures, inverted V's, are characteristic. And a lot of that has to do with what's on the left, which is that you have different kinds of water coming in, creating cones and egg carton and wavy laminites. It occurred to me that the configurations of stromatolites reflect the processes operating or influencing the growth. So I remember we were down in South America, and I was standing and the waves were coming in, and then waves came in from the other side that I hadn't expected. So if you have multiple sources of waves, multiple sources of depth, multiple sources of the depth of the photic zone and nutrient flow, you're going to get different looking forms. All right, this is, now we're on a march, 3 to 2 billion tiger iron, Wyoming black stromatolite, and collenia. And this is the great oxidation event. This one is really interesting, and I put it here because it's been analyzed, and they point out here that it's got siderite, pyrite, pyrrhotite, and magnetite. So you look at that, and you got to say that the stability range in this thing is jumping around because it's got magnetite and pyrrhotite and pyrite, so it's in that central area, and then it's got siderite, which falls off the map. So it's coming under the influence of a variety of deuteric or post-deuteric influences. Ephemeral volcanic basin is what they came with. All right, this is banded iron, comes from the Cleaverville Formation in the Ord Ranges of Western Australia, 3.02. And I'll just mention this. You can see the silver dark, that's probably magnetite or hematite, and then the red is a chert or a jasperite, and then the yellow, what's that? Well, I went through some struggles trying to figure that out. So when you look at it, you know it's chrysotolite, tiger eye, but then where did that come from? It's after riebeckite, and the source of the elements in riebeckite, it comes off of what might be a lateritic environment that is releasing the iron and the magnesium. So and it does it episodically or periodically. This one, this dark one down here, is from Wyoming. I got that probably 20 years ago. And the dark one, and then the one over in the corner, that's the Ishpeming. That's a photo. I don't have that, but that's a photo. And this is on the onset of the Great Oxidation event. Then spanning the Great Oxidation event are these are collenia, and one of them looks kind of like petrified wood, and this one here has got hematite going over these digitate figures that you see. So these little columns, they're putting on layers like fingers, and the next one's putting on fingers, and then in between, in this interstitial space, is some kind of specularite or something of that sort. All right, jumping into the 1.7 Paleoproterozoic stromatolites. This stuff, I collected this in Australia. These are just gorgeous, and they're not metamorphosed. So the one up there on the right is a digitate. It was growing to keep up with the photic zone and the water coming in, and then things slowed down, and the patterns started to get more like a broccoli head. And this stuff is rough, but you can see alternating bands. So it's got the mucilaginous or the polymeric material that's seizing and integrating the grains into it. This is in the same area with walls of this stuff, and this goes on for acres and acres. This is the way the world looked. And the one up there, the upper right, is kind of a rhyolitic dike. There was an extensional influence there, and the dike came in, and it filled in the crack. Prospecting for stromatolites. I thought, well, okay, how do you prospect for stromatolites? Look for pre-Phanerozoic environments, because that's when the stromatolites thrive. They don't thrive so much today. Continent-busting rift systems, or alakajons, failed rifts, arms of a continental triple junction, or long-lived linear rifting basins traceable for hundreds of miles that may have stromatolite exposures. I think that's true of the lake states up north. Complex shorelines that foster diverse stromatolitic depositional features, like the Mescal has that. Angular, domal, orbicular, sheeted, hummocky, calcsilicates where they're near diabase. Layering within dolomitic material. Geological extremes with respect to humans. Remember, somebody says extremophile, they're talking about what's our comfort zone. This room, anything that's beyond this room starts to verge on an extremophile. So extremophile refers to high elevations, deep sea, extremely cold Arctic, Antarctic, and then pockets of moisture in arid locales. And we'll look at some interesting Navajo sandstone. And then coincidence or association with diabase. Sometimes there'll be diabase there and it'll be after for example, after the Apache, but sometimes the diabase will come in with an extensional environment. The Mescal, Chewer, and related stromatolites, plus the southwestern Laurentia large igneous province, circa 1.1, including the 1.1 diabase. All right, this is busy, but I wanted to just put that in there because this is the Southwest LLP, which is Laurentia Large Igneous Province. So what's going on? The dates, the igneous province started here at 1094. This has very precise dating, and so the province expanded, and by the time you get down in Arizona, it's got 1098 influence, and that's coming out in the diabase province that then interjects into the Chewer group, the Mescal, and the Pahrump over around Las Vegas. And then you can see over here the diabase sill and the Unker group. The Unker is the lower one that's tied in with the Mescal. And the diabase is in there, you can see it highlighted. Does this fit into stromatolite occurrences? Maybe not, it depends on what the timing and the source is, but our study, meaning the people that did this, Moore et al., reinforces how high precision uranium lead zircon geochronology lays a foundation for defining and correlating ancient magmatic episodes and yields the temporal resolution needed to test complex interactions between plume magnetism and continental lithosphere. And what they did was they identified that the diabase has a kind of one age, and then the Cardenas lava and the lavas on top, high up on Aztec Peak, as part of the Sierra Anchas, are a little bit different age. They come in a relatively small age difference, and they can do that because they can measure it. All right, this is the Mescal. Here's the Salt River and walls of Mescal, and then you see the couple of different styles of stromatolites on the south side. Then this is more textures out of the Mescal. This one has some horizons of diabase that have cooked the Mescal, turn it into calcilicate. And this one, you can see the horizons of asbestos that have developed in there. The middle the greenish piece is calcilicate from the south side of the Salt River Canyon. Now, going to the Sierra Anchas that have similar stratigraphy, we're looking up to Aztec Peak and the crown of the Sierra Anchas, and those beds up there include the Mescal, and that's where stromatolites can occur. So we can have them deep in the canyon and high up in the Apache group. Now, on the far side, how do you propagate the diabase? With dikes. And so there's thousands of feet of diabase, and they're fed by these vertical feeders, and the diabase is pretty unstable. It weathers readily. There's a piece of it in the middle, that dark piece. It basically looks gabbroic. To show the high degree of contrast in the Mescal, here's a relatively well-ordered piece of Mescal, and then here's this chaotic one. So you can only imagine and try and interpret what is going on along the shoreline to create such textures. This is the top of the unit. These are the units that the diabase had to come up through, and these are contemporaneous, more or less, with the stromatolites. You get a lot of clastic, siliciclastic rocks. All right, this is the Grand Canyon, which is all part of that same thing. And by that I mean that the rocks that we just looked at occur in one way or another pretty much in this cross-section of the Grand Canyon. S equals stromatolite, and they have in the Unker group, which is the deeper one, they have an S, and maybe that's a diabase dike. And then in the Chewer group, you have the S repeatedly. And so the significance of that is that there is hydrocarbons in the Chewer, And we've gone down the canyon and seen that stuff. And so this is another view of it. The Chewer group is over here, and I'll show you a little bit of a write-up. Over there is the Grand Canyon Lodge. I worked there when I was 18 years old. It burned down. It's not clear to me if it inattention by employees or forest fire. But anyway, I missed that place. What an institution it was. So now, here's the Chewer, some close-ups of the Chewer. As the Boxonia, the brains, that's A up here. And then B is Stromatolite Bacalia, probably have the pronunciation off. Microbial buildups on laps and eventually covered by sediment. And then crinkly laminated dolomite over here. And then there's a series of sections here, and you can see the little kind of wicket-looking thing, and those show a density of stromatolites, and you can trace them from one place to another where they've done their field work. And I'll just summarize this. Oil-bearing characteristics of Chewer microbiolites. What they did was they've got what they got in the canyon. They can walk by it and map it. But then they started looking for subcrops. In other words, they figured the Chewer extended all the way up into Utah. And were there compatible oil-bearing strata up there? And so they drilled a bunch of holes to see if the Chewer extended up into Utah and northern Arizona to test the overlying Cambrian to peat sandstone reservoir and confirm the existence of the Chewer in subcrop. Precambrian is winding down. We're in the cryogenic and the snowball earth. Onset of metazones. These are kind of the bad guys that are us. Okay, so I collected these over near Nevada, and they're either from the Noonday Dolomite or from the Pahrump or overlapping. But you can see the top, and then you can see a side view. And this is interesting. Grand Canyon lava falls. This is a remnant of lava falls. It's something that sticks out in the Colorado River. And then you can see over the photo on the right, you can see masses of lava that are there. And question to AI, I asked AI, could water dammed behind the lava falls Grand Canyon back up to Havasu Canyon? They told me yes, ancient lava dams on the Colorado River in the western Grand Canyon once caused a lake to back up, reaching areas that would have included the location of Havasu Canyon. The dam formed by lava flows blocking the Colorado created a lake that existed for a time. Thousands of years, as it turned out. Why did I ask that? Because I went hiking up Havasu Canyon, and just above the river as it stood during that time, the blue water was the water of the old days. That was the prokaryote water, and then the brown was the water of fish. The brown was the water of fish. And then you go up and you see the falls. As I was going up, I saw these weird formations, but they weren't that weird to me because they looked like stromatolites, some kind of microbiolites forming these bulging surfaces. And then when they broke away, you could see that they were layered and there were other views of them. So I thought, well, what's the deal? That's not going to be formed just on those walls without input. So it turns out that when you go to New York, you see places where there are actual, like this Green Lake State Park, where they've got a lot of water, and then beneath the water are these stromatolites, these bulging masses. And I think, I'm speculating, that the bulging masses that were underwater were the same that were in Havasu Canyon, and they grew, and then with the reestablishment of the Colorado River trace, the water drained down, but something equivalent to this was exposed in the walls. The onset of metazones in competition or cooperation with stromatolites at the end of the Precambrian and beginning of the Paleozoic. So here's two massive stromatolitic broccoli heads, and then in between it is a sponge. So I thought about, and this may be a poor analogy, but I thought about an ironwood over in the western Arizona, guarding the growth of a saguaro, protecting it and providing soil. I don't know if that analogy is even appropriate, but it occurred to me. These are, which animal is first in the Neoproterozoic? There's a couple of options, but let it be understood that whichever one it was, the animals won out. And then this is humans and stromatolites, the genetic section. This is for another time, but it's interesting. Biological complexity, I'll say highly complex, multicellular eukaryote organisms with specialized tissues and organ systems, whereas the stromatolites are microbial communities, primarily cyanobacteria, that form layers of organosedimentary material. Okay, and then despite these profound differences, there are a few similarities that reflect our ancient shared evolutionary history. Universal genetic code, both humans and the bacteria stromatolites use DNA as their genetic material. More fundamentally, the basic molecular machinery for reading and translating DNA into protein is highly conserved across all forms, including bacteria. Now, why did I put this in there? So imagine that you're on the earth, there's nothing but rock, and in this case, I was over here in Iceland, and I visited a flow that was south of the capital, and it flowed into the Atlantic, and it was only 73 years old, and it was covered with moss. And so that's a good example of an entisol, which is a lack of distinct soil horizons and little to no evidence of development. And so you have that, and then 75 years later, you have a mass of moss that's a foot thick. So life is capable of growing over an entisol environment. Now this, I am nobody to talk about this. We have experts in the audience, but suffice it to say that this is Tenkefingerumi, where the Congo craton and the Kalahari craton have created a rift zone, and within that rift there is an environment for stromatolites to grow and for copper later to get localized in those stromatolitic horizons. The stromatolitic horizons include the RSF, the D-strat, and the RSC, and those are French, so it's Roche, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I don't have my translation here, but those are the names of the formations. And so the RSF is a laminated microbial dolomite, and the RSC is a domal porous stromatolite. So you see one's horizontal, one's got its domes, and they're all can contain copper horizons. And then over here, I looked at this malachite, and I thought, man, that's awfully dark. It has heterogenite in it, I believe, with malachite, and that's what makes it dark. And if you flip it over, it's very black, very black. So ore concentrated at the contacts between laminated shales and shale dolomites and a probable hydrothermal aquifer, a massive silicified algal dolomite. And you can see it on the cross-section over there. Gallery of Paleozoic and Mesozoic microbiolites. This is what's interesting. The Ordovician life's second Big Bang, the Great Ordovician biodiversification. And so here's a stromatolite from that event. And now, if you go down the San Juan River, there's a place in Goosenecks where you go by bioherms, and basically bioherms are flexed up, probably Pennsylvanian limestone that has this Ivanovia, which is a kind of the core of a stromatolite, and it's got other phyloid algae, for example, is another one. I think that's a phyloid algae over there, fossils living in late Paleozoic. And then here, the river is cutting through, and the person who did this diagram put these bioherm symbols in here so you can see where it goes, and then they have some over there at the Mexican Hat syncline. And then that's an overview there. So thanks to Dick Upshman for one photo and to Dave Briggs for the other, the core. This is an example of the Horkia limestone, and it was drilled and put in a core box, and it has bornite in it, and this has occurred in some southeast Arizona deposits. And then the field exposure of Naco limestone, the ERP. This is cool. So who's ever heard of Navajo sandstone having stromatolites? Well, that's what they identified up at Capitol Reef National Park. This is a big stromatolite within the Navajo beds. And what happened is there's I think they call it a super horizon, super surface. And it's right here. There was a change in sand deposition. Water accumulated enough to get some microbial material growing, and it turned into something that's 6.1 meters tall. And then this shows where the continent is relative to the Phanerozoic paleolatitude track of Arizona. It's mostly in the northern hemisphere, a little bit in the southern hemisphere. But the J up there, of course, Navajo is Jurassic, and so the NS, that's about where it is. It's up there somewhere where wrapping it up? Okay. So, all right, so I speculated that this might be related in some way, in terms of history, to the old red sandstone of the Devonian in Scotland, and this is a stromatolite from that area. This is Cretaceous Amoli Lake in Tucson, and then I'm going to buzz through this. These are Eocene River Formation. This is the East African Rift Zone. This is core tree with stromatolites growing on it, and it's in a lake environment where the water's changing. This is Tondo Natural Bridge that has stromatolitic deposition. These are oncoids and thrombolites that are not layered, but they occur as examples of material that builds up in a shallow water zone where they're rolling. And this is a highly marginalized, punky piece of Marion Lake stromatolite. It's basically fresh. It was cut. And then all right, so I'm going to advance to a few things, to this. These are all from different places. This is gypsum environment up in the Argentine. Mars observation and galaxy. All right. There is a book out, and the book is called Proof of Life on Mars in 200 Pictures. Algae, microbial mats, stromatolites, and it's got these photos. And they say, and they're scholars, we conclude there is life on Mars. Or more to the point, there was life on Mars, but they also see some other material that are current. And then they have examples of it, and enough for those 10 scholars to believe that there is life. Back to Earth, Antarctica metazones, SCUA, this is Antarctica, versatile common orange lichen, and Adelie penguins on the rocky nests. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. We covered a lot of ground. We went from the old days to Mars. So you can tell your spouse that's where you've been. Any questions? Floyd, you said you wanted to ask a question? Come on, one of those provocative ones. Yeah.
We don't have too much time for questions.
I just have one. Okay. Can we get a copy of the slides?
Probably not. I'm still working on them.
Okay.
But give your name to Ann. And any other questions? Thanks for your interest. I hope you found it exciting.
I want to give Dan a little award to commemorate his talk tonight. It was incredibly thought-provoking, and very ambitious. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And acknowledge Karen Wenrick has donated minerals to us to have speakers plaques. So thank you, Karen. Yeah, this is native copper from Upper Peninsula, only like 1.1 billion years or so. So nothing, really nothing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dan.